Day my daughter stood up at her wedding reception and introduced me to 200 people as the woman who used to babysit her. I didn't cry. I didn't make a scene. I picked up my clutch from the table, smoothed the front of the dress I'd spent $400 on, and I walked out of that hall so quietly that half the room didn't even notice I'd gone. What I did after that is what I want to tell you about. But first, you need to understand who I was before that night, because none of what happened makes sense without knowing how I got there. My name is Lorraine. I'm 63 years old and I live in Sudbury, Ontario, have for most of my adult life. I worked as a registered nurse at Health Sciences North for 31 years. 31 years of 12-hour shifts, of overnight rotations in the ICU, of driving home in February through whiteout conditions because someone had to be there, and that someone was always me. I am not telling you this to make myself sound heroic. I'm telling you because when you hear what came later, you'll understand the particular kind of tide I was carrying. My husband, Frank, left when my daughter Paige was 4 years old. It was no dramatic explosion. He just slowly became someone who wasn't there, first emotionally, then physically. And one morning I woke up, and he was gone. He'd taken his duffel bag, his fishing rods, and roughly $1,100 from our joint account. He left a note on the kitchen counter that said he needed to find himself. Paige was asleep upstairs in her room with the butterfly wallpaper I'd put up the summer before. I did not fall apart. I couldn't afford to. I went back to full-time hours at the hospital. My mother, God rest her, took Paige 3 days a week. We made it work the way women in this country have always made things work, quietly, efficiently, without asking for applause. Frank resurfaced 2 years later. He'd found himself, apparently, in the form of a woman named Cheryl from Timmins. He called occasionally after that, sent birthday cards that sometimes arrived on time. Paige adored him in the way children adore parents who are never quite there, with a kind of desperate, uncritical love that I never fully understood. I tried not to interfere with that. I swallowed a lot over the years. When Paige was 12, Frank moved back to Sudbury. Cheryl was out of the picture by then. He started showing up more regularly, weekend visits, the odd school event. Paige bloomed every time she saw him. I watched her face light up in a way it didn't light up for me, and I told myself that was fine. That was healthy. I was the day-to-day. He was the fun. What I didn't realize, not until much later, was that Frank was also rewriting history during those visits. Not maliciously, maybe. I've thought about this a great deal, but consistently. The story he told Paige slowly over many years was a story in which he'd been pushed out, in which I was cold and difficult and had made things impossible, in which his leaving had been, if not justified, then at least understandable. He didn't say I was a bad mother outright. He just planted seeds. By the time Paige was in her late teens, I could feel the shift. Small things at first. She'd come home from a weekend at her dad's and be a little more guarded with me. She started correcting me in conversations. She'd say, "Dad said that's not how it happened," about events she hadn't been old enough to remember. I tried to have honest conversations with her about it. They didn't go well. I didn't push. I kept working. I kept paying for things. I paid for Paige's university at Carleton. 4 years of tuition and residence, roughly $80,000 over the degree, when you factored in books, flights home at Christmas, the semester she needed a new laptop because hers had died 2 weeks before finals. I did not resent this. I had saved carefully. I wanted her to start her adult life without debt. She graduated with a degree in communications and moved to Ottawa. She got a job at a marketing firm. She started dating a man named, well, I called him her partner. I'll call him her partner here too, because whatever name I give him, what matters is what kind of man he was. He was the kind of man who believed his family was better than everyone else's. He came from money, old money by Ottawa standards, and he wore that fact like a second skin. His mother had opinions about everything, and somehow those opinions always landed in Paige's mouth a few days after every family dinner. I met him twice before the engagement. Both times I drove 5 hours to Oshawa. Both times I paid for dinner. When Paige called to tell me they were engaged, I cried happy tears. Genuinely, whatever complicated feelings I had about her father, whatever distance I'd felt growing between us, I was her mother, and she was getting married, and I was happy. Then she told me the wedding would be in Ottawa at a venue her future in-laws had suggested, a heritage property on the outskirts of the city. The rental alone, she mentioned casually, was $14,000 for the weekend. I asked how they were planning to cover costs. She said they'd been hoping I could help. Her father was contributing what he could, which turned out to be $3,000, which everyone seemed to regard as generous. His partner, Cheryl, who had improbably come back into Frank's life, was apparently throwing in a gift basket. I don't know why I said yes. I've asked myself that question many times. I think it was because I'd been saying yes to Paige for 25 years, and I didn't know how to be the mother who said no at her wedding. I think I was also afraid of what saying no would cost me in terms of whatever relationship we had left. And I think, somewhere under everything, I still believed that if I showed up fully enough, generously enough, she would one day see clearly. I contributed $47,000. That was my RRSP, partially collapsed, plus savings I'd been building since I was 38. I paid for the catering, the florals, and the photographer. I paid for Paige's dress, $3,200 from a bridal salon in the Glebe. I paid for her hair and makeup in the spa morning she had with her bridesmaids the day before the ceremony. I did not pay for any of this grudgingly. I want to be clear about that. I paid for it because she was my daughter, and it was her wedding, and I loved her. I also want to be clear about something else. 3 months before the wedding, I was diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer. I didn't tell Paige right away. The diagnosis came in late March. The wedding was in July. My oncologist and I had a conversation about timing, about the treatment plan, about what was realistic. I decided, and this was my decision, made clearly in consultation with my doctor, that I would begin treatment in August, that I would get through the wedding first, that my daughter did not need to carry this into her marriage. I told my sister Audrey, who lives in Thunder Bay. I told 2 close friends. I told no one else. I showed up to that wedding looking, I think, quite well. I'd had my hair done. I wore a navy dress with a low heel. I sat at a table with Audrey and 2 of Paige's friends from university, who I'd always liked. The ceremony was beautiful. Paige was radiant. I cried during the vows. The reception was at the same property in a glass-walled room that looked out over the river. The food was excellent. I'd chosen the menu myself. The florals were exactly what she'd wanted. Everything I had paid for was present and perfect in that room. About an hour into the reception, there was a welcome toast. Her father-in-law gave it. Then Frank stood up and gave one too, rambling, sentimental, largely about himself. And then Paige stood up. She thanked her in-laws for welcoming her into their family. She thanked her bridesmaids. She thanked her partner for choosing her. She talked about her father, how much he'd shaped her, how his resilience had taught her about love. And then she said this. She said, I also want to thank Lorraine, who helped out with some of the logistics for today. She used my name, not Mom, Lorraine. And helped out with some of the logistics. I felt Audrey's hand find mine under the table. Paige sat down. The room applauded. The DJ started up again. Nobody except Audrey, and possibly the 2 university friends, seemed to register that anything unusual had just happened. I sat there for about 4 minutes. I counted them almost. I was thinking very clearly. I was not panicking. I was not going to make a scene in my daughter's wedding. But I also understood, sitting in that chair in a room full of flowers I had chosen and food I had paid for, that something had just been said that could not be unsaid. I picked up my clutch. I told Audrey I was stepping out for air. She looked at me and she knew the way sisters know, and she squeezed my hand once and let me go. I walked out through the main entrance, past the coat check, through the heavy oak doors, and out into the July evening. A parking attendant held the door. I thanked him. I walked to my car, a 2019 Honda CR-V that I bought used and paid off, and I sat in the driver's seat for a while. I did not call Paige. I did not go back in. I drove to the hotel where I was staying, changed out of the navy dress, and sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. Audrey texted to check on me. I told her I was fine. I wasn't fine, but I also wasn't broken. There's a difference. In the morning, I drove home to Sudbury. Paige and her husband left for their honeymoon in Portugal. I had paid for half of it as a wedding gift, a payment I'd made in April. I did not try to reclaim it. It was spent. What was done was done. I let her have her honeymoon. I started my cancer treatment in August as planned. It was hard. Anyone who has been through chemotherapy knows there is no accurate way to describe it to someone who hasn't. It rearranges you. You have good days and days where you cannot get off the couch, and days where those are the same day. I drove myself to most of my appointments. Audrey came down for 2 of the harder weeks. My colleagues at the hospital, I was on medical leave by then, sent cards and a meal train that kept my fridge stocked for 6 weeks. I am still grateful for that. I did not tell Paige I was sick until October. When I did tell her, she was upset. She said I should have told her sooner. She said she'd had a right to know. We had a difficult phone call that went in circles. At some point, she said that she'd always found me hard to connect with, and that she'd never felt like I was emotionally present for her. I listened to this. I didn't defend myself. I had learned by 63 that defending yourself in that kind of conversation achieves very little. What I did do after that phone call was make some decisions. I had a meeting with my financial advisor, a woman I've worked with for 15 years. I told her I was revising my estate planning. The changes I made were straightforward. The money I had left, reduced after the wedding, after the RSP collapse, after treatment costs, was redirected. A portion to Audrey, a larger portion to a bursary fund I set up through the nursing school at Laurentian University for mature students returning to healthcare. It wasn't a dramatic gesture. It was just a choice about what I wanted to leave behind. I also wrote Paige a letter, not an angry letter. I want to be clear about that. I'm too old and too tired for angry letters. It was a factual letter. I told her in plain language what I had contributed to her life financially over the years. Not to shame her, but because I think she genuinely did not know the full picture. Her father had always been vague about money, and she had absorbed that vagueness. I told her about the tuition, the wedding costs, the honeymoon. I told her about the RRSP. I told her about the cancer diagnosis in March and why I had chosen not to tell her before the wedding. And I told her what it had felt like to sit in that room and be introduced as Lorraine, who helped with logistics. I didn't ask for anything in return. I wasn't looking for an apology to trade for forgiveness. I sent the letter and then I let it go. She called 3 weeks later. It was a Sunday afternoon, late November, grey the way Sudbury gets in November. She was crying before she said hello. She said she hadn't known. She said she was sorry. She said her father had told her over the years that I had a large inheritance coming, that the money wasn't really a sacrifice, that I had more than I let on. She said she believed him because it was easier to believe him. I listened to all of it. When she finished, I said, I believe that you didn't know. I believe that you're sorry, and I need you to understand that sorry is a beginning, not an ending. I don't know yet what our relationship looks like from here. I need some time. She said she understood. She was still crying. We hung up. It's been 8 months since that conversation. My cancer is in remission. My oncologist used the word cautiously, the way oncologists always do, but she used it. I am back at work 3 days a week. I bought myself a small painting from a local artist, something I've been meaning to do for years, and it hangs in my kitchen where I see it every morning. Paige and I talk now. It's careful the way things are when the ground has shifted and you're still testing where it's solid. She's asked me questions she never asked before, about what it was like when Frank left, about how I managed, about what I actually felt during those years. I answer honestly. I'm not performing the role of easy, forgiving mother. I'm just being a person, which is something I should have insisted on a long time ago. I don't know if we'll ever be close in the way I once imagined we might be. There is grief in that, and I won't pretend otherwise. But I also know this. I sat at that reception table, sick and silent, and paying for everything around me, and I still walked out with my dignity. Nobody gave that to me. I chose it, and I'll choose it again. That's not nothing. At 63, after everything, I've learned that choosing yourself, quietly, without announcement, without waiting for anyone else to see it, is the only kind of strength that actually holds. I've been sitting with this story for a while now, turning it over the way you turn a stone in your hand, feeling the weight of it, the edges, trying to understand what it was really made of. What I keep coming back to is not the wedding, not the toast, not even the word logistics, though that word still lands somewhere tender when I let it. What I keep coming back to is the $47,000, and the fact that I gave it without condition while carrying a diagnosis I hadn't told my own daughter about. I was protecting her. I told myself that then, and I still believe it now. But I also think there was something else in it. I think I was afraid that if I wasn't useful, I wasn't necessary. That's a hard thing to admit. It took me most of my 60s to see it clearly. The thing about cause and effect, real cause and effect, not the simplified version we tell ourselves at 2 in the morning, is that it rarely moves in straight lines. Frank leaving when Paige was 4 didn't make her cruel, but it made her vulnerable to a story, and her father told her one for 20 years. And I, by staying quiet and capable and endlessly available, accidentally confirmed it. I let her believe that things came easily to me, that the money wasn't a sacrifice, that I was fine. I was so busy being fine that I forgot to be a person she could actually see. That's not her fault entirely, and it's not entirely mine, but it is something I had to reckon with. What I know now, from the other side of treatment and the other side of that phone call in November, is that real integrity, the kind that actually holds, isn't about grand gestures. It's about small, consistent choices that nobody applauds. It's 31 years of overnight shifts in the ICU. It's driving yourself to chemotherapy because you don't want to be a burden. It's writing a letter that tells the truth without asking for anything back. Nobody gives you a standing ovation for that, but it builds something in you that nothing can take away. I think that's what I was trying to model for Paige all those years. I just never explained it out loud. The clarity that comes with illness, and I say this not to romanticize it, because treatment was brutal and I wouldn't wish it on anyone, is that you stop tolerating your own avoidance. I had spent decades being smart about everything except the things that mattered most to me personally. I could assess a patient's condition in 90 seconds. I could manage a household budget down to the dollar. But I could not look at my daughter and say, this dynamic between us isn't working, and I need it to change. That took cancer, apparently. That took sitting alone in a hotel room in Ottawa in a navy dress, finally understanding what I'd been paying for all those years. Paige is trying now. I can see it in the questions she asks, the careful way she listens. She has more work to do. We both do, but she's doing it. That matters. The willingness to look honestly at yourself, to sit with what you find and not run from it, is not a small thing. It may be the hardest thing. I'm proud of her for it even now, even after everything. And me. I bought a painting. I hung it in my kitchen, Every morning I make my coffee and I look at it and I think, you made it. Not gracefully, not without cost, but you made it through. That's enough. That has always been enough.